My name is Virginia Claire Morley. I'm 75 years old. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment in the south end of town, where the sidewalks are cracked and the trees lean like old friends. My building isn't much: red brick, rusted balconies, laundry room in the basement that smells like lint and vinegar. But it's mine. I've been here for 16 years. Moved in the winter after Harold died. I remember the snow that week stuck to the ground like dusted flour, and the movers dragging boxes labeled fragile, as if nothing inside could break. Before this, we had a home. Not a grand one, but solid. White shutters, blue front door, backyard with wild ivy that Harold used to pretend he'd rip out next Sunday. He never did. That ivy stayed until we sold the house, 2 years after his heart attack. When the silence in the hallway got too wide, our daughter helped with the paperwork. My son called in from another city, said, "Whatever's easier for you, Mom." Everyone was kind. Everyone thought they were helping. I don't blame them. That house had a garage with a wooden cabinet Harold built. It held old trophies, faded cards, even our wedding photo in a frame that didn't match the rest. I wrapped that photo in a wool scarf and carried it in my lap to the apartment. I remember thinking, this will be the only thing that makes the new place feel like mine. I wasn't wrong. After Harold, I lived like someone on pause. I volunteered at the library once a week, walked to the park some mornings to feed the pigeons. I said yes when my daughter offered to take a few boxes for safekeeping. At the time, I thought it made sense. The apartment was smaller. There was no guest room, no attic, no garage. So I gave her some of it, not the garbage, the things I couldn't throw away but didn't have space for. 3 plastic tubs and 2 cardboard boxes. All the letters Harold wrote me before we were married. The postcards from our honeymoon in Cape Cod. My mother's teacups. Ben's kindergarten handprint in clay. Lauren's first dance recital costume. My wedding dress, folded into layers of paper. The newspaper clipping when Harold won the school board seat. And photographs. So many photographs, I labeled them clearly, with shaky but careful handwriting. Family memories, for storage only. I remember standing in Lauren's foyer, watching her husband lift the boxes down to the basement. I said, "Just until I figure out how to make room." She smiled. "Of course, Mom. It's safer here anyway." I believed her, because Lauren was always the organized one, the one who made color-coded lists and meal plans and packed her kids' lunches the night before. Her basement had bins with labels in bold font: Halloween, winter coats, baby toys to donate. Mine had a leaking pipe and a mop I forgot to throw out. So I let her keep the things that didn't fit into my new narrowed life. Years passed like that, quietly. Birthdays came, grandchildren arrived, photos were taken on phones now. The things in those boxes were never mentioned again, until recently. But that's another part of the story. For now, know this: I never stopped remembering, even if they thought I should, even if they thought memory belonged in storage. It started with a small question. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays are when I change the bed sheets and water the plant by the kitchen window, the one that never flowers but stubbornly stays green. The wind outside was restless, pushing the curtain in with a soft hush, and I was going through my kitchen drawer looking for a postage stamp. What I found instead was a single photograph, creased at the corners and slightly curled. It showed Harold sitting on the back porch in his corduroy jacket, holding a coffee mug with his name on it. His smile was crooked, like he had just said something foolish on purpose, waiting for me to laugh. I sat down at the table and stared at it for a long time. That photo had once been in an envelope, one of many letters he sent me the year he worked upstate before we married. Suddenly, I could hear his handwriting. I know that sounds strange, but there's a sound to some people's writing. His always felt warm and unhurried, like someone pulling a chair out for you. I realized then I hadn't seen those letters in over a decade, so I called Lauren. She picked up quickly, always efficient. Hey, Mom, everything okay? Yes, sweetheart, I hesitated, folding the edge of the photo between my fingers. Do you still have those boxes I left with you? The ones from the old house? She paused. A rustle in the background, probably folding laundry. The ones from, oh, the basement ones. Yes, the ones with the letters and photos. Another pause, then a soft exhale through her nose, the way she does when she's trying not to be impatient. Mom, I'm sure they're down there, but do you really need them? I mean, they're kind of just old stuff now, right? You don't have much space, and honestly, I don't even know if the paper's holding up after all these years. I tried to keep my voice calm. I just wanted to look at them again. There was a longer silence this time. Then she said, in that gentle but managerial way she often uses with her kids, Mom, it's just, you don't have closets, and some of those boxes are pretty beat up. It's honestly safer here. Our basement is dry, and it's not like you go through that stuff all the time, right? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I do, I said. I do want to go through them. She didn't answer right away. Eventually, she said, well, I'll ask Mark to check if they're still okay. But you really don't need to worry about all that. It's just memories, right? Just memories. After we hung up, I sat very still, the kind of still where even the air feels hesitant to move. I thought about how that phrase sounded coming from my daughter's mouth. Just memories. I wondered if she thought that was something to be outgrown, like shoes or beliefs or dreams you stopped chasing after 40. I wondered when I became someone people tried to protect from her own history. Later that evening, I made soup, turned the radio on, tried to distract myself with a crossword, but the letters came back to me, the way Harold wrote my name with a long underline, like it needed grounding. The way Ben's tiny hand had gripped a blue crayon and scrawled, Mommy, I love you, across the back of a grocery list. And I thought, they're not protecting me from clutter. They're pushing me out of it, out of my own past, as if memory were something to be gently managed, like lawn care. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back with the ceiling fan circling shadows around the room and remembered every photo, every envelope, the yellowed receipt from the diner where Harold proposed, the silver ribbon from Lauren's third birthday, a lock of Ben's baby hair kept in a small envelope marked with the word first. It wasn't junk, and I wasn't a guest in that history, and I began to think very quietly at first that maybe what I needed wasn't for them to hand it back. Maybe I needed to take it. That night stretched like a hallway with no doors. I couldn't sleep, though I tried. Twice I got up to warm milk, once to reheat the soup I hadn't really touched. I even turned on the television, volume low, but the blue light only made the apartment feel colder. The remote sat beside me, untouched after the first few minutes. I found myself staring instead at the photograph I'd taken from the drawer earlier that day. Harold on the porch, mug in hand. I could smell the coffee. He always made it strong, always added just a pinch of nutmeg. Ever since our second winter together, when we couldn't afford fancy blends and tried to spice up the cheap stuff. I could hear the creak of the porch swing and the sound of the screen door slapping shut behind me. We were young in that photo, or rather, not young, but whole. When you're young, you think memory is something built in. You think it'll stay. You don't imagine there'll come a day when someone else will hold your past in a box and call it junk. But Lauren didn't mean harm. I told myself this over and over. She was being practical, protective. Her way of caring always came with good intentions, even if they arrived wrapped in bubble wrap and stacked in the basement next to Halloween decorations and old strollers. She loved control, loved clean spaces, grew up in the same house I did, but learned different lessons. She never liked mess. And me? I had become a kind of soft clutter, the mother who always remembered birthdays and carried too many bags to family dinners, the grandmother who brought dusty photo albums instead of toys, the widow who still kept Harold's slippers by the bedroom door, even though they hadn't touched his feet in 16 years. Around 2 in the morning, I sat by the window. The building across the street had one window still lit. A young man, maybe a student, pacing with headphones on. I watched him for a while. Maybe he was trying to memorize something for an exam. Or maybe he couldn't sleep either. Maybe memory was chasing him too, but in a different way. It was then that I realized they weren't going to give it back, not because they wanted to hurt me, but because they no longer understood why I needed it. And I did. I did need it. I needed the brittle letters and fading photographs. I needed the scratchy audio cassette with Harold's voice recorded from an answering machine in 1993. I needed Ben's kindergarten painting of a fire truck, the one where all the wheels were green. I needed the baby shoes, the birthday cards, the pressed violets between the pages of that old hymn book. I needed them because I didn't have a porch anymore, or Harold, or a house where my children came home from school and dumped their backpacks in the hall. I needed them because they were me, not the part that volunteers at the library, not the woman who brings apple pie to potlucks, not the sweet old lady the neighbor helps with her groceries, but the part that still feels, that remembers touch and color and scent and weight. I don't know when exactly the decision was made. Maybe it had been coming for years. But at 2:27 a.m., I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and took out my little blue notepad, the one where I make grocery lists and keep track of the books I lend out. And I wrote in careful, blocky letters, "Tomorrow, go get it." All of it. Then I circled it and underlined it twice. The next morning, I didn't rush. I made my tea like always, black with a slice of lemon, sat at the table, buttered my toast. I even wrote a birthday card to a friend from the senior center. I let the morning stretch. I needed the steadiness. At around 11, I put on my gray coat, the one with deep pockets. I took the tote bag I use for groceries, even though I knew I wouldn't need it. I brushed my hair, buttoned the coat all the way up to the top, and slipped on Harold's watch. It hadn't worked in years, but I still wore it on days that felt important. Today felt important. Lauren's house was only a 20-minute drive, and I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want to give her a chance to talk me out of it. This was not a discussion. This was not about what was practical or neat. This was a reclamation. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet, tidy, with trimmed hedges and cheerful porch flags. Mark's truck was in the driveway. The boys must have been at school. Lauren worked from home most days now. I wondered if she was in the office, typing away with her noise-canceling headphones. I rang the doorbell once, then waited. When the door opened, Lauren's expression went from surprise to warmth, then quickly to concern. "Mom, is everything all right?" "Yes," I said. "I've come for the boxes." "The boxes?" "The ones from the house, with the letters, the photos, the wedding dress." She blinked. "Oh, right now?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I'd like to take them back." She opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Okay, sure. They're down in the basement. Some of them are really heavy. I don't think you can carry them all by yourself." "That's all right," I said. "I'll manage." Mark came to the door then, holding a mug. "Hey, Virginia, everything okay?" "She's here for the memory boxes," Lauren said. Mark raised his eyebrows but didn't comment. "All right, I'll bring them up." They brought them up one by one, 5 boxes. some dented, some taped more than once. The blue label on one had peeled at the corner, but my handwriting still showed. Family, memories, for storage only. Lauren dusted the top of one with her palm. Are you sure you want them in your place? You don't really have the room. I'll make room, I said. She stood there a while, watching me, then said softly, It's just things, Mom. No, I said with a small smile. It's not. Mark helped me load them into the car. I thanked him. He patted the roof. You good to drive with all that? I nodded. It's only 20 minutes. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but he didn't, and neither did Lauren. As I got into the car, I glanced at the house one last time. It was warm, modern, polished. A family lived there, but it wasn't mine, not anymore. That was all right. I didn't want to go back inside. I didn't want to reclaim that space. I just wanted what had been buried beneath it. I drove home slowly. The boxes took up most of my hallway, stacked like a silent welcome. I didn't open them right away. I made tea. I turned on the radio. I sat for a while, letting the quiet come back. And then, carefully, I opened the first lid. Inside, the smell hit me first. Old paper, dried glue, a faint trace of rose perfume. Mine, from a bottle that had broken during a move decades ago. It clung to the letters somehow. I ran my hands over the envelopes. Harold's handwriting, dates in the corner, a pressed flower in one. I opened another box, photographs, dozens, some loose, some in albums. Ben as a toddler in a sailor suit, Lauren with missing front teeth holding a pumpkin, Harold in the garage, covered in sawdust, me in the background, always a little blurry, always holding something, always there. One by one, I went through them. No rush, no panic. I was cataloging something more than memory. I was restoring myself. By the time the sun dipped low, I had cleared a shelf in the living room. I labeled folders. I sorted by years. I found empty photo albums and began arranging things. I wrote captions, names, places. I used stickers for fun. Harold would have teased me for that. I cried once, maybe twice, not from sadness, from fullness. The wedding dress was yellowing at the edges. I didn't mind. I hung it in the hall closet next to my Sunday coat. It belonged here. That night, when I finally went to bed, the apartment didn't feel small. It felt full. And finally, it felt mine again. They thought I was hoarding again. When I came for the boxes, no one said it out loud. But I saw it in their eyes, felt it in the softness of Lauren's voice, in the cautious way Mark placed the heaviest container by my front door, as if to say, Let's be reasonable now, Virginia. But I wasn't hoarding. I was restoring. The next morning, I began with the smallest box, blue plastic, cracked slightly at the side. The label had long since peeled away, but I knew what was inside before I lifted the lid. The weight of certain memories sits in your hands like a fingerprint. This one was heavy with paper and the scent of old ink. I cleared my kitchen table completely, moved the salt and pepper, the placemats, the vase with dried lavender, laid out a clean linen cloth. This would not be rushed. This would not be done between errands or as a background task. This was the work of a curator, one who was both subject and archivist. The letters came first, bundles wrapped with string, some opened, some still folded with neat creases. I picked one at random. The envelope had no stamp, just my name, written in Harold's hand, Virginia Clare. Not Jenny, not Mom, not Mrs. Morley. Virginia Clare. Full, proper, deliberate. I read, April 3rd, 1969. You said yesterday that you worry you'll forget the sound of your father's voice. I thought about that all night, so I'm writing this letter to tell you that I remember. Not his voice, I mean, but you when you talked about him. You looked at the floor, but your hand went to your necklace, and your voice got so still, And I thought, this woman holds more silence than most people hold words. I want to be someone who keeps her full. I think I already am. Love, Harold. I set it down with care. And then I opened the next, and the next, until the whole table was covered in Harold's voice, his years of love written on motel stationery, postcards from teacher conferences, birthday napkins, legal pads, even a torn page from a children's book that read, I love you bigger than the moon. I didn't cry, not because it didn't move me, but because I felt seen all over again. I bought a binder at the stationery store the next day. Not a cheap one, not the flimsy kind for coupons, but a thick 3-ring leather-bound album. I ordered acid-free sleeves and dividers. I even got little gold corner stickers and a label maker. The teenage clerk tried to make conversation while scanning the items. Scrapbooking project? I nodded. Something like that. The days that followed had a rhythm. Not quite routine, more sacred than that. Morning tea. Then I opened a box. Sometimes it was photos, entire decades in a single pile, waiting to be placed back in order. I made categories: 1960s, before kids; 1970s, new house, new baby; school years, vacations, the porch years. I used sticky notes. I scanned some to preserve them digitally, but I printed them too. I wanted to touch them. Each one I handled with care, not just for the paper's fragility, but for what they held. There was a photo of Ben, age 5, holding a toy ambulance and crying because it was missing a wheel. I remembered how he'd refused to throw it away, how he'd named it Lefty and insisted it was special because it always leaned toward adventure. I captioned it, Ben, age 5, ambulance, Lefty, hero of the toy shelf. There was a photo of Lauren at her junior prom, standing by the living room window in a seafoam green dress that we had found on sale for $42.50. She had hated it, said it made her look like a mint chip, but she'd worn it anyway, for me, and smiled. I captioned it, Lauren, 17, green dress, reluctant grace, light from the west window. Every photo told more than one story. I refused to let them be seen as clutter. I wasn't saving space. I was marking existence. One afternoon, I found the wedding dress. It was in a box labeled FABRIC, probably Lauren's doing. She always thought in terms of category. The dress was wrapped in tissue paper, yellowed at the folds, but intact. The lace sleeves had small pulls. The waistline looked impossibly narrow, but I recognized it instantly. I held it up and stood in front of the hallway mirror. Time didn't reverse. I didn't become the girl I was in 1965, but I remembered her shoulders, her cautious smile, the way she trembled as she waited for the music to start, the way Harold's hand had steadied her when they met at the altar. I didn't hang it back in the closet. I bought a dress form online. It arrived in a giant box, which the building's handyman helped me carry up. I adjusted the measurements until it matched the old ones I found on a medical form from our wedding year. I dressed it slowly, carefully, and I placed it by the bookshelf. Visitors now think it's a decoration, but it's not. It's a witness. Eventually, the project outgrew the kitchen table. I cleared the spare bookshelf, donated some mystery novels I didn't love, made space for binders, created labels, letters, Harold, photos, kids, house years, documents, each with a spine title, each placed with care. I bought archival boxes for the fragile items, the baby shoes, the porcelain figurine Harold gave me on our 3rd anniversary, a napkin with a lipstick kiss I found tucked in one of the letter envelopes. Everything had a home now, but not just any home, mine. One morning, as I dusted the shelf, the phone rang. It was Lauren. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. She hesitated, then said, So, Mark went looking for that framed photo of our wedding. You know, the one you had on the mantel when the kids were small? We wanted to make a digital copy finally, but we couldn't find it. I said nothing. I think it was in one of the boxes you took back, she added. I still said nothing. Do you, still have it? I do, I said. Could you send us a scan or a copy? There was a pause then, a real one, not digital lag, emotional pause. Then I said very gently, I'll think about it. She didn't argue, didn't press, and that was when I realized they had wanted the memories without the keeper. They had wanted the story, but not the storyteller. A basement archive, but not the historian. A curated past, stripped of the one who could narrate it. But they had misjudged. I had always been quiet, accommodating, easy. But I was also deliberate, and I had remembered what they forgot. That memory isn't a storage problem. It's a presence problem. By spring, the apartment had changed. There was an entire wall now dedicated to the Morley family archive. Friends from the community center began to visit, curious. They'd sit with me and leaf through albums. Some of them wept. Some of them laughed. One woman said, "This is better than a museum. It's alive." And it was, because I had taken it back, not out of spite, but because memory, when properly held, becomes legacy, not junk, not clutter, a reclaiming, a restoration, a room where I was no longer just the past's keeper, but its rightful hostess. It was mid-May when Lauren came over again, unannounced but not unwelcome, the kind of visit that used to be normal when she was younger, when she'd swing by with a grocery list or two giggling kids or a new haircut she wasn't sure about. But this time, she brought nothing in her hands, not even her phone, which was unusual for her. She rang the bell and waited instead of using her key. That alone told me something had shifted. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around as if unsure what she was seeing. The bookshelf had expanded since she last saw it. 4 binders had become 9. The wedding dress now stood in a corner on its form, casting a soft shadow on the wall beside the armchair. 2 small archival boxes sat on the coffee table, their lids open slightly like old books mid-sentence. Sunlight from the western window lit the room gently, and it all felt, finally, intentional. Lauren stood still for a few seconds, her eyes moving from the shelf to the dress, from the albums to the boxes. Then she spoke. "It's like a gallery in here." I smiled. "It's a home." She nodded slowly, then looked again at the albums. "I didn't think you'd go this far." "You didn't think I'd need to," I said gently. She turned toward me, her eyes softening. "That's not fair." I didn't say it was, but I also didn't retract it. She sat down carefully on the edge of the armchair, the one closest to the binders. Her fingers hovered near a photo album labeled 1975 to 1982, the backyard years. I watched her hesitate, wanting to open it, afraid to ask. She finally spoke. "Ben said you told him not to ask for the VHS tapes." "I did. You told me not to ask for our wedding photo." "Yes." She turned toward me, her voice lowering. "Why, Mom?" I sat across from her, folded my hands over my knees, and said nothing for a few seconds. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to speak clearly, carefully, like writing a final line in a long letter. "Because I needed to know," I said at last, "that I didn't only exist as a keeper. I needed to know that I wasn't just a shelf for other people's comfort, that the memories weren't safer in someone else's basement just because I'd grown quiet about them." She frowned slightly. "But we didn't throw them out. We just thought." "I know what you thought," I said. "You thought they were too heavy for me, that maybe they didn't matter as much anymore, or that I'd feel better letting go. But you forgot something important, Lauren." She looked at me, waiting. "They were never your memories. They were ours, And now, most of them, they're mine. There was no anger in my voice, no spite, only calm. The kind that comes when you've sorted through hundreds of photos, dozens of letters, and finally placed your past exactly where it belongs. Lauren nodded slowly. She didn't argue. Instead, she opened the album. The plastic sleeve crinkled softly as she turned the page. Her wedding shower. Aunt Jean at the table with the punch bowl. The cake I had baked. Too much frosting, uneven layers, but hers. The girls from her book club in floral dresses. And Lauren herself, 24, radiant and unsure, holding a paper plate of chicken salad and smiling at someone out of frame. I remembered the moment. I remembered what I had whispered to her when she stood up to give thanks and forgot her words. You don't need to impress anyone, sweetheart. Just speak from where you are. Lauren didn't say anything for a while. Then her voice cracked just slightly. I forgot about that day. I didn't respond. I let her feel it. She turned a few more pages, slower now. A birthday, a trip to the zoo. Her son in a stroller, Harold crouched beside him with a soft grin. Then she looked up at me again. Do you really think we tried to erase you? No, I said, but I think you erased the need for me, which is quieter and lasts longer. She let out a long breath. That wasn't what I wanted. I know. We sat in silence again, the kind that settles between two people who are both remembering and learning at the same time. Then she said, What do you want me to do, Mom? Do you want me to leave all this alone now? I shook my head. Number, I want you to ask, not assume. Ask. She nodded. Okay, can I borrow one photo of the wedding? The one with me and Dad at the altar? I considered it. Then I said, I'll make you a copy. That night, after she left, I pulled out another box, one I hadn't touched yet, labeled audio. Inside were cassette tapes, one from our answering machine in 1992, one of Harold playing the piano, one of Lauren at age 6 singing Twinkle, Twinkle into a plastic recorder. I found a small cassette player at a secondhand shop a few weeks back. Cleaned it, tested it. I popped the tape in, pressed play. The room filled with crackling silence. Then, Hi, it's me. I'm stopping for groceries on the way home. Do we still need eggs? Harold's voice. Distant, casual, beautiful. I closed my eyes and listened. Then I labeled it, July 1992. Eggs reminder. Still perfect. A few days later, Ben called. He'd heard from Lauren, of course. Mom, he said, Lauren told me you've basically built a museum. It's a living archive, I said. He laughed. Of course it is. Then, more seriously, I know I haven't asked for much back, but I was wondering, do you still have the postcard I sent you from Amsterdam? The one with the bike on it? I do. Can I see it again? I wrote something on it I've kind of forgotten. I was 19, but I think I told you something that mattered. You did, I said. I'll send you a scan. Thanks, Mom. I thank you for keeping it. I don't think I knew how much you kept until now. You never asked. That week, I received 3 more calls. One from a cousin wanting a photo of our grandmother. One from a neighbor who remembered I had a group photo from the PTA picnic in 1980. And one from Lauren again, this time asking if I would help her daughter, Emma, put together a family tree project for school. I said yes. We worked on it over tea and ginger cookies. Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, leafing through an album and asking questions. Who's this? Why was this one crying? Did Grandpa really fall off a ladder? I answered all of them. At the end, she looked up at me and said, You remember everything. I smiled. Someone has to. By summer, my apartment wasn't just full. It was alive, not with noise, not with people passing through, but with presence, with shape, with memory, honored and organized, accessible, protected, mine. They used to say I didn't have room, but now I have space because space isn't about square footage. It's about recognition, about standing in the middle of your own life and saying, I was here. I remember, and I decide what stays. It came on a Tuesday, not a holiday, not a birthday, just an ordinary soft gray Tuesday where the clouds hung low and the morning rain gave everything outside a quiet, washed look. I had just finished updating the captions in the 1990 to 1999 photo album, replacing a few that had faded under the plastic sleeves with a fine tip archival pen. I had just written under a photo of Harold and Ben fishing, Ben's first trout, Harold's 100th joke about patience. I was setting the album back on the shelf when the phone rang. It was Lauren. Her voice was cautious at first, almost too even. The way people speak when they're holding something behind their back, not physically, but emotionally. Hi, Mom. How are you? I told her I was well. I asked about the kids. I asked about work. She answered all of it, but didn't linger. Then, after a pause long enough for her to think better of it, she said, Mom, do you still have the photos from our wedding? Not just the one of me and Dad, but the rest, the group shots, the one where Emma was asking who everyone was. She said she'd like to see more. I sat back in my chair. That moment was small on the surface, a simple question, a reasonable one. But beneath it, something was shifting, something quiet but significant. This wasn't about logistics anymore. It wasn't about what was easier or safer or more practical. This was acknowledgement. They were beginning to realize that what I held wasn't just a collection of old paper. It was a map, a key, a structure of memory they had started to need again. I do have them, I said. Lauren hesitated. Could we come over and look at them together? It had been a long time since she had asked to come in, rather than just pick up. I didn't answer right away. I glanced toward the albums, then toward the coat rack where Harold's old fishing hat still hung. I wasn't angry. I hadn't been for a long time, but I remembered the sting of her voice from that day. It's all junk. You don't have closets anyway. I remembered nodding. I remembered saying, I do. Why? And now, she was knocking at the door I had quietly rebuilt. Yes, I said finally. You can come. They arrived the next evening, Lauren, Mark, and Emma. No bags, no rush, no signs of turning the visit into an errand, just their presence, a small bouquet of tulips in Lauren's hand, and a plate of store-bought brownies that Emma insisted she had picked out because Grandpa used to love chocolate. We sat in the living room. The archival boxes were already out, stacked on the coffee table in their labeled glory. 1995, the wedding. 1996, early marriage. 1997, first grandchild. Lauren reached for the first one carefully. She didn't just dig in. She lifted the lid with both hands, as if afraid it might disintegrate. Mark sat beside her, silent. Emma leaned forward, eyes wide. The light from the lamp pooled warmly around them, and for a moment, I just watched. And then Lauren pulled out the top photograph. It was the one with Aunt Jean laughing mid-chew. Someone had told a joke. Harold, most likely, and the camera had caught her, mouth open, eyes closed, a napkin in her lap and powdered sugar on her sleeve. Oh, Lauren whispered. I forgot she was even there. She gave the toast, I said. Remember? No, I don't. She quoted Shakespeare, something about time and love and standing still in your presence. She cried a little. Lauren looked at me, stunned. How do you remember that? I was listening, I said simply. Everyone else was watching the cake. We went through more photos. Slowly. No one rushed. No one tried to get through the stack. They asked questions. I told stories. Mark smiled and nodded. Emma asked what I wore on the honeymoon. Lauren leaned back and laughed when we found a photo of her and her best friend dancing barefoot under the tent. And then the question came, not from Lauren, not from Mark, from Emma. "Grandma," she said, "do you think we could borrow a few for our family wall?" I paused, not because I was hesitant, but because I realized what was really being asked. Not just, can we borrow the photos? But rather, can we be part of this again? Can we step back inside this memory now that we understand it's more than clutter? Can we be trusted now with the past? I looked at her small hands, her careful expression, the way she tilted her head just like Lauren used to when she was unsure but hopeful. "I can make copies," I said. She smiled. "That's okay, as long as we can look at them when we come." That's when I understood the real difference. Before, they wanted the memory without the person who held it. Now they were asking for me. Later, as they were putting on their coats, Lauren lingered. She stood near the door, holding the empty brownie plate in one hand, her other tucked in her pocket. "I know I didn't understand before," she said. "I thought I did, but I didn't. I know. You kept it all, even when we didn't ask, even when we didn't want it." "I wasn't keeping it for you," I said. "I was keeping it because I needed to remember, and maybe because I knew one day you might need to, too." She nodded. Her eyes glistened slightly, but she blinked them clear. "I'm sorry." I reached out, touched her hand gently. "Don't be. Just remember better next time." After they left, I sat in the armchair with a cup of tea. The room was quiet, but not empty. Never again empty. I glanced at the wedding photo album, still open to the page where Harold had dipped Lauren into a half-joking dance during the father-daughter song. His face was flushed from champagne. Her eyes sparkled with both embarrassment and joy. I placed a new caption under that photo. "Returned, not the photo, the place in it." The final shift didn't come in the form of an argument or an apology. There was no climactic confrontation, no late-night call full of tears. Instead, it came gradually, like the slow unfurling of a fern. Quiet, unnoticed at first, and then impossible to ignore. It came in how people entered my apartment. Before, it had been a passing through sort of place, a stop on the way to somewhere else. Visitors stood near the door, glancing around politely, but never settling. They'd leave their shoes on, glance at the clock, smile through small talk. Now they stepped in differently, slower, eyes drawn to the shelves. They removed their shoes without being asked. I hadn't expected that, and I hadn't realized how much I needed it. One afternoon in early June, my neighbor Claudia came by. She's 79 and still teaches piano out of her living room 2 days a week. Her hands are small but firm, with the kind of muscle memory that only comes from decades of Chopin and cracked metronomes. "I brought you something," she said, holding up a pale pink shoebox. I raised an eyebrow. "Shoes?" she chuckled. "No, silly. Things I thought I'd thrown away. But then I remembered what you're doing. The project, it's not a project," I said. "It's my life." "Exactly," she replied. "That's why I brought mine." We spent the afternoon cataloging her contents. A scarf her mother wore during wartime, a matchbook from a long-closed jazz bar, a black and white photo of her first piano student, a love letter she never sent. I gave her one of my spare binders and some labels. We drank tea. She cried once, just for a moment, and I thought, this is what we're doing now. Not preserving history like a museum, but anchoring it. Not to be displayed, but to be kept whole. A week later, a young man knocked on my door. He was maybe 25, tall, awkward, shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he hadn't rehearsed how to stand still. He wore a delivery badge around his neck, but his hands were empty. "Are you Mrs. Morley?" I nodded. "I am." He looked relieved. My grandmother, Alma Pierce, she said I should talk to you about, remembering. I tilted my head. Remembering? She said you helped her put together a memory book. She said you knew how to find meaning in junk. Her words. I smiled. Well, that's kind of her. She also said you might help me with my dad's stuff. I mean, he passed last year, and I've got all these boxes of his things and no idea what's worth keeping or what's even mine. I invited him in. We didn't start that day. I told him to come back with one box and a willingness to talk about what wasn't on paper. He came the following Saturday, and again the next. Word spread. Not in a flashy way, but in the way that stories used to move, through kitchen tables and folded napkins and shared benches at the post office. I never advertised. I never charged. I didn't host events. But once a week, someone came with a box, sometimes small, sometimes full of chaos and folded maps and unsent letters. I had a simple rule: you don't get rid of anything until you know what it is. And people listened. Meanwhile, Lauren began coming by more often. She brought Emma sometimes. Other times, she came alone. We never talked again about the junk comment. We didn't need to. I saw it in the way she now handled the albums. Gloves on, sleeves lifted carefully, captions read aloud. One day she asked, "Do you ever get tired of looking back?" I thought about that for a moment. No, I said, because looking back isn't the same as living in the past. One is memory, the other is regret. I don't carry the latter. She nodded. I think I was scared you did. Maybe I used to, I admitted. But this work, it's made me honest about who I was, about who all of us were. I don't need to change any of it now. I just need to see it clearly. Lauren looked at me for a long time after that, then said, "You're not just my mother anymore." "No," I said, "I'm my own archive." One Sunday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The light through the kitchen window had that golden powder softness that only comes in summer. I boiled water, sliced an apple, sat at the table with my tea, and I realized something quietly monumental. I hadn't felt like a guest in my own life in weeks, months maybe. I was no longer navigating around other people's plans for my past. I wasn't tiptoeing around what was too much or not relevant or inconveniently sentimental. I had taken back my signatures on letters, on photos, on stories, not by stamping them, but by writing them again, carefully, deliberately, with footnotes and dates and corrections when necessary. I had made peace with the fact that no one else would remember the same way I do, and that's not a tragedy. That's legacy. They wanted to keep the memory without me. That was the part that hurt the most at first. To be gently pushed out of my own narrative. To be reduced to the footnote in other people's beginnings. But now they have the basement. And I have a room, not a storage room, not a corner shelf, not a drawer in someone else's idea of enough space. I have a room where I am not a guest, where my handwriting is the final draft, where memory doesn't need to be explained because it's organized, understood, known. I don't need to ask permission. I don't need to wait for someone else to decide what's still worth keeping because I am here and I remember, and that is enough.